Hello and welcome to Post Sports Live. I'm Gene Wong. Joining me this morning to discuss the sports stories that matter most to you in the DMV and around the country is our three-person panel from the Washington Post sports staff, starting with, on the aisle seat, Des Bueller from the Early Lead, Chelsea Janes, Washington Nationals beat reporter, and to my left, Dan Steinberg, columnist, and you also know him as the original DC Sports Blog. We're going to get to every one of DC's professional sports teams today and some NFL. We're going to start off with the two teams involved currently in the first round of the playoffs, a team that's trying to get to the playoffs, the Washington Nationals, and finally a team that has been in the playoffs 4 times in the last 20 years. That would be, of course, your Washington Redskins. But off the top, the Washington Wizards won Game 1 in Toronto, take a 1-0 lead in the series, are back at it tonight against the Raptors. With that in mind, Dan, I will ask you, are the Wizards in the driver's seat given that the Raptors no longer have home court advantage?
I think they are, but I don't think it's because of the home court advantage thing. Because we saw last year they were a great road playoff team and a pretty terrible home playoff team, and they weren't particularly dominant at home this year. And so I don't know that that's really the deciding factor. To me, it's because the reason I feel optimistic is because they suddenly seem to be using last year's playoff recipe again, which was they have a better defense than almost any team in the Eastern Conference, and Toronto's got a great offense. But if Toronto can't score against the Wizards' defense, it's not going to make a difference. I mean, the Wizards just, to me, looked like a better team. Obviously, they did everything in their power to blow it over the last couple minutes there. But I think the Wizards' defense is going to win the day, especially if they've got Paul Pierce chipping in points like he did the other day. This was a much, much younger, more vital version of Paul Pierce than we've seen for weeks.
Yeah, they held the 4th best scoring team to 20 points under their average, and that includes an overtime, and they held them scoreless for 4.5 minutes in overtime. Chelsea, are you a believer that the Wizards are in control of this series right now?
Well, I mean, I think Paul Pierce certainly looked good, but I don't know if he can play 37 minutes a night, and sustain that. I mean, certainly, I think another reason to be optimistic is you got the performance you got from Wall and Beal, which was kind of a non-performance scoring-wise, and still were somehow able to have a lead to blow. So I feel like defense, obviously, like you said, is sort of the key, that they were able to match up really well with Toronto's backcourt, and if that continues, it almost doesn't matter what they do offensively because they'll be able to presumably get a little bit more out of Wall and Beal and be safe. It's
a little surprising to you that their record in the regular season against Toronto, that all of a sudden they go there to Air Canada Center and look like the better team. They shut down one of the best backcourts, that, as Chelsea mentioned, in the game. I mean, are they in the driver's seat because of that?
I mean, it's funny because both the Wizards and the Capitals games went to overtime, right? So, and if you had a different result in either game, we'd be having a different conversation about both these teams. But you know what? The Wizards won. And if you want to be optimistic about it, there was a lot of good things to take away from that game. I mean, they dominated on the boards. You like that. There's going to be a lot of rebounds apparently available in this series. Both teams are bricklaying like crazy.
At least in the first game.
Yeah, at least in the first game. And the Wizards, it looked like a very evenly matched series at the start, and the Wizards at least landed the first blow in terms of the X factor, which obviously was Paul Pierce. I mean, he talked the talk, and then he walked the walk in a big way, got inside their heads. So, if he can keep that up, he doesn't have to score 20 points every night, but if he can be a distraction, and if someone else can step up and have that kind of out-of-nowhere game, I think the Wizards could be in very good shape.
Yeah, what do you think of the rotation, the bench players? Because Nate didn't play, obviously, for a while, then he played in overtime.
It was weird, yeah.
Humphreys didn't play,
Humphreys
right?
didn't play,
yeah,
which, I mean, to me, Humphreys is a far better option, I would think, than Kevin Seraphin, who was surprisingly played in the...
made some pretty big shots.
Yeah, but not necessarily the guy that I would have thought they'd have on the floor. I mean, I guess if they need offense in this series, Seraphin is more likely to provide it than any of the other big men. I think Drew Gooden was actually the first guy off the bench.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about rotation going down the stretch, but if we had used the last 2 weeks as clues, we would have missed it pretty much entirely. And so I wouldn't be surprised if they don't necessarily have a playoff rotation if this changes game by game.
Well, Chelsea, you mentioned that Beal and Wall. You expect them to have bounce-back performances, both those players, tonight in Game 2?
Well, I think just kind of regressing or returning to the mean, they probably will. But, I mean, it's not like they're going up against, Joe Schmo in the backcourt there in Toronto. I he
have the sixth man of the year.
They have Lou Williams, that's right.
They also shut down.
I think about Lowry, though. I think there might be some questions with his health. He had some injuries down the stretch, and the Raptors aren't talking about it, but didn't look very good. No. He didn't look very good.
Well, Des, I asked Dan about the rotation, but was it surprising to you that Humphreys didn't play at all, and that Porter got so much run? He made a huge shot, obviously, in overtime.
It appeared that Whitman was going with a small ball kind of lineup. I mean, you saw
Pierce
play
as the stretch four, right?
Yeah, as the stretch four, and it worked. So, and you wonder if they were kind of waiting for the playoffs to unveil that lineup because they hadn't really used it during the regular season. And so maybe now that they've surprised the Raptors with it in Game 1, maybe they'll go back to something else in Game 2, but maybe don't go away with something that worked pretty well.
Yeah, well, we were talking about how they were kind of floundering down the stretch, and all of a sudden they seemed to turn it on in the first game of the playoffs. So
Bear
I
in
guess
mind also that Toronto was floundering down the stretch.
That-
too.
no, good
so,
point.
so one of them was going to have to unflounder.
So much floundering.
well, speaking of floundering, the Washington
Yes.
Capitals are down
Yes.
2-1 in their series against the New York Islanders. The only reason they were in the last game is because of Braden Holtby. Fantastic job in goal. Dan, what needs to be corrected for them to turn this series around? Obviously, there's a lot to get to, I would say.
Yeah, I don't know that there's a lot of like corrections per se. I mean,
Yeah.
it seemed like the Islanders had just a far more push in the first two periods on what was that Sunday, and so I mean you expected maybe the first 10 minutes were going to be like that with the crazy home crowd at the Coliseum, but I think that the first 10 minutes became the first 20 minutes, became the first 30 minutes, and the Caps just had nothing offensively for the first two periods. Fact is, in the third period, they really controlled the play until they scored that goal, and then somehow it seemed like they let off a little bit, or the Islanders came back, and then overtime was obviously a disaster. But I mean, I think if they play a game like they played that third period on Sunday, I think they would be fine. And if they get one game out of these this 2-game set, they'll be fine coming back home. So I'm not panicking about that.
Are you in that boat, Chelsea? You're not panicking? If you're a Caps fan, should you say everything's going to be okay, or is there some cause for concern?
Well, I think there's certainly cause for concern when you don't get a shot off in the first 10 minutes, a shot on goal. But like you said, if they can control the puck like they did at the end of that game, I mean, sort of everything else sort of clicks into place. And I don't know that they've been able to do that consistently, throughout the season. So that's a big if. But Braden Holtby can't be facing 42 shots a game and expect to come out of that with a win. And I think maybe they were lucky to survive that and get to overtime. So I think if there's one fix, it's controlling the puck and also just trying to stay physical, which will get tougher when you don't have Eric Fair and those guys in there and you're kind of shuffling. But I think they just kind of need to control the puck.
Is there one correction in your mind, Des, or is it a whole laundry list of things?
I mean, the correction would be to play way better for most of the game. I
Sure.
mean, they were grossly outplayed in the first two periods, and then the shot differential at even strength was just
kind of staggering.
insane.
Yeah.
So I mean, you can't help but look at Game 3 and think they were lucky to even take it to overtime. And then in overtime, I mean, it was only 15 seconds, but you saw the Caps again have trouble getting the puck out of their own end, and that was a problem over and over again, and it led to the game-winning goal. So they have a lot to clean up, and losing Eric Fair doesn't help anything. They might not have Marcus Johansson in this game. I think. This may be even too obvious a point, but this is a good time for Ovi to step up and have a huge game. He has 1 point so far in the series. The Capitals' power play has been horrific.
Alex Pruitt wrote about that, how they've been shut down.
Yeah, exactly. Alex Pruitt wrote about it. I happened to read that, so I agree wholeheartedly. This is just. I think Ovi needs to put this team on the proverbial back and lead them somewhere.
I don't disagree, but the games and the numbers are so tiny that you say the power play has been bad because they're 1 for 6. If they got one more goal, then they'd be 2 for 6, and that'd be above their average. You say Ovechkin's bad because he's got 1 goal.
Right.
When he averages about. I mean, his average through 3 games would be about what 0.75.
Yeah, well, everything's magnified in the playoffs, and that's why people who do well in the playoffs get all the kudos, and those who don't do so well, take the blame.
Great. I just mean all these numbers for Ovechkin and for the power play could be reversed with one single good play.
I guess the Caps have been. I don't think you can expect them to just turn everything around and outplay the Islanders, especially in Nassau Coliseum. Right. So I think it is fair to ask the superstar player to have an individual performance that's really above and beyond everything else.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
Well, it's going to be a huge night for Washington sports fans. In addition to the Wizards and Capitals, the Nationals are playing. They're opening a huge early season series against the St. Louis Cardinals. And Chelsea, I'll ask you, how important is it for them to come out winning this series, or is it important at all? I know it's still early in the season, but they've obviously been a little bit shaky to start the season, the Nationals.
I think it's important for that reason. I don't necessarily think it's important because it's the Cardinals. I don't think they get anything out of getting two of 3 games against the Cardinals that they wouldn't get getting 2 of 3 games out of anyone at this point, and that may be kind of an oversimplification. Certainly they want to beat one of the best teams in the league, but they're still kind of settling in, the Nationals are, and so many moving parts in the bullpen and stuff. It's more of sort of just like a barometer of, hey, are we okay? What do we need to look at in the bullpen in terms of solidifying things? Are we going I think it's just like a very good test as more than, oh my gosh, we have to get these wins because otherwise we could, be 4 games under 500 in mid-April. I don't think they're really thinking of it that way.
Well, yeah, Des, it's 3 games early in a 162-game schedule. How much difference does it make if they win this series or not?
I don't think it makes a ton of difference because, and I'm speaking as a Mets fan here, the team at the top of the division has been hot, but now they're getting hit by injuries. It's so frustrating. You know, they're probably not going to run away with anything. I mean, we're talking about the Mets here, and then the team in second place is the Braves. They're probably not going to go too far this season. So I don't think the Nats have a ton to worry about. I do think there are some individuals who would like to do well in this series, starting with Gio Gonzalez. You know, he needs to pitch better. I think the team wants to see something out of him. But if he doesn't do well, they just have Scherzer and Fister in the next 2 games, so that's not bad either. And you have some guys coming back like Worth and Span who probably want to get on the right track.
May not want to get to the bullpen though, as we've seen recently. Dan, this series, what are your thoughts on?
Yeah, no, I mean I kind of agree with Des. I think another name that he didn't mention would be Ian Desmond, just sort of trying to play like a normal professional.
I'm partial to Desmond for obvious reasons.
Who obviously he's been hitting just fine, but the defense has been abysmal and kind of baffling, like way beyond normal April Ian Desmond even. So I mean I think maybe you want to see him get on track and stuff, but I think this is going to be the problem with our show for this whole Nats season and with a lot of Nats fans for the whole season is it just feels like the playoffs are such an inevitability, even though they might be scuffling a little bit right now because of the Mets, because the Mets being the class of the division besides the Nats, and I don't think they're particularly scary, and the rest of the division, the Phillies aren't good. I mean,
they're not good.
The Braves, the Marlins are playing terribly, and the Braves are probably not as good as their record, so it feels like it's really hard to put any kind of stock in any particular game or series in April when all that really matters, it feels like, is October.
But you do want to, as far as team confidence goes, I think you do want to see the bullpen come together to some degree, because that can affect the team's psyche, I think, a little bit if they're afraid that leads are just going to slip away over and over again, and you don't know who's even coming into the game in the 6th and 7th inning.
Well, Chelsea, I want to ask you about that because James Wagner wrote about the bullpen and how it's actually not been that great, obviously. What's it like in the clubhouse? What's the confidence level in those middle guys, especially now that Stammen's on the shelf?
I mean, that was a huge loss. I mean, I think the count is like 325 and 2/3 innings lost from last year's bullpen. That is almost all of the innings. Like, that is a lot of innings. So basically all you have is Storin. And I think series like this become important because you have guys, Felipe Rivera's 23 years old, you have Barrett and Trinan, guys you've seen before that are still inexperienced, still adjusting to new roles. Throw them in there against the Cardinals in games that feel a little bigger because it's the Cardinals, and you get more of a sense of where exactly they are, because I think the early season stuff was just crazy. I don't know that you can take a whole lot from that.
Yeah.
But I think it's a really nice test for those guys and sort of see what they have, because if they don't have what they think they have, they need to go find it, because that bullpen has been the problem in the past, and it's not going to just fix itself with these young guys.
Casey Janssen rehabbing from right shoulder tendonitis. What's the prognosis for him? I mean, is it a long way off?
Not a long way off, but I don't know how much he helps. He's one guy who's, leaning on the rickety side of things, and tendonitis in the shoulder is not a good thing. I mean, maybe it locks down the 8th inning, but, they still have a lot of question marks, and losing Stammen created a whole lot more of them, I think.
Well, Dan, the outfield finally healthy. How much of a matter of them getting better is their health?
No, I mean, I think that's huge. And I think that, honestly, at the end of spring training, if you had said Worth and Span are going to be in the lineup by, what is today? The 21st. I mean, this is probably certainly ahead of schedule for Span. I mean, to me, the big question now is more than Jansen is Anthony Rendon, and where is he, and what is he doing, and when is he ever going to play again? Do you know the answer?
Let's
put you on the spot.
Which is not a normal baseball term. That's for sure.
Well, we've covered all the teams local teams that are in season. The Redskins are off season, but we know they make headlines in the off season more than they do during the regular season. Their off season workout program has started this week. They've made a few moves in the off season, Dan. Nothing huge, but I want to ask you grade-wise, what would you give them, given that they haven't reached like they have in past seasons for huge free agent contracts?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing that we're going to judge them on, both this year and going forward, is the draft, because that's what Scott McLuhan says he wants to build this team around. And so it's probably a little bit hard to assess what they've done before the draft starts. But I guess
they help the secondary a little bit, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the fact that they didn't do anything that stands out as absurd, and that they're obviously gearing towards this draft, and even something as maybe silly as the whole Mariota chatter, making people sort of just not really have any idea what they're doing. It feels like, again, like they're kind of doing something that like a competent organization might do during the offseason.
Oh my goodness.
So I would say like B so far. They haven't done anything outlandish in either direction, but I'm really curious what happens with the draft, and I think like a lot of people, I would like to see them try to amass more picks going into this draft, maybe on the day of the draft, and really try to take some of those chances and see if they can hit a lottery ticket.
Well, Chelsea, I guess the baseline is, as Dan said, not doing anything catastrophically bad, right? Are you going to give them a B2, or are you higher than that?
Does that seem harsh?
No. I mean, I'm with you on that. They've had some catastrophic free agent signings that have been disasters.
Yeah.
Well, I think, grading is tough, but B is fine. I think they've addressed a little bit, they've helped out the defensive line a little bit. They've put new bodies in the secondary. It almost doesn't, they just needed somebody there, and they, did pretty well in Culver. He's a guy that's going to hit. I don't know what you're going to get in Johnson necessarily. He hasn't started, I think he started one game in 3 or 4 years, but he's going to hit people hard. And, so they've added in places where they needed to add. They haven't made a huge splash, like we've said, but their huge splashes haven't gone well. So I think, like you said, they're heading into the draft in a place where they've sort of solidified some areas, and they haven't done anything stupid yet. And I think that's sort of almost all you can ask for at this point.
Yeah. So Des, the Skins being under the radar makes them a higher grade than in past years when they've been the team that people talked about signing players, right?
Well, certainly when McLuhan took over, he had the reputation of someone who, as Dan said, liked to build through the draft and not make splashy free agent acquisitions. So by that standard, you give them an A, right? Yeah. I mean, they have not made splashy free agent acquisitions. That said, I'm not crazy about the Redskins.
Well, you wouldn't call Kai Forbath a splashy free agent signing?
Not so much. Maybe when he gets in the bathtub. Other than that, I like what they've done with the defensive line. I think they made a couple of smart signings there, but overall, I don't think it's very impressive. They don't seem to have looked at the offensive line at all. And I mean, that's a major point of concern. They appear to be going with a youth movement. Maybe Compton will step forward. Maybe Spencer Long will step forward, and maybe they'll draft somebody. But that's still a youth movement kind of thing. And I think that's a big area of concern that wasn't really addressed. And if you look at the offseason in total, including like the coaches they hired, I don't know if they did a great job there either. I think Callahan and Matt Kavanaugh don't have great track records in the NFL.
Are you a believer?
Joe Barry, we'll see. He doesn't have the greatest track record, but yeah, I think Matt Kavanaugh is a bit of a hack. So if he's brought in to help the quarterback situation, which is the most important thing, I don't know if the Redskins help themselves that much.
Well, I mean, I think that's an interesting point that you raised, but I think that the approach to me seems to say we're not really selling out to win in 2015, which I think is what a lot of people would want them to do. And I think the quarterback thing is part of that. They probably don't have a quarterback of the future on this roster, but they probably don't need to worry about that right now because they don't have the roster of the future. So I kind of like that approach.
We're 9 days away from the draft, so obviously we'll have a lot of time to break that down. But what's happening tonight is the NFL is releasing its schedule for the regular season. They've turned this into an event, as only the NFL can do. They make everything they do an event. Dan, I'll ask you, how much do you care about the release of the schedule? It's a big deal for NFL fans. Is it a big deal for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of is good. It's kind of cool. And, in England, the EPL dominates everything, and no one like rips out their hair and says, this is so awful. This is our national sport right now, for better or worse. And this is a big part of the sport, is knowing who's going to play who and when. And so I think it's kind of cool. I mean, it's obviously a little bit obnoxious that they're going to take so much attention away from the NHL and NBA playoffs, but if you're the
and
big
Major League Baseball,
baseball regular season, but if you're like the big dude on campus or whatever, you might as well like squash all the little people around you. So I think it's cool. I mean, I will be tuned into the Caps and Wizards just because probably that's more what my current job requires. But I think that our readers and our viewers probably care more about the schedule release.
Well, Chelsea, you'll be at the Nats game, but let's say you weren't. Would you be watching the NFL release? Would you care about it?
I would not be watching it, but I would be I feel like I'd be in the minority, like among sports fans. I mean, it's just, it gets hype because people watch it. People will, if you put it there, they will watch 3 hours of coverage. I mean, I think we saw a stat that was like the NFL draft last year over 3 days got double the amount of viewers that Game 7 of the World Series got. And you figure it's staggering.
That's crazy, yeah.
And that says it all. It's like, it really doesn't matter if it should or not get this much hype because it fills it. It lives up to that, and people watch and it makes money, and it's amazing.
Well, Des, as a fellow fantasy junkie, I'm sure it makes a huge deal to you that the NFL is going to release its schedule. Tell me why.
That is, you've hit on it, Gino. That's the main thing about the schedule release now. We've already known what the teams, who they were going to play already. It's just a matter of when. So, early in the season, you could look at a team with a terrible offense, like I would guess the Browns, and pick a fantasy defense to play them. If you have to draft a defense, you'll draft whoever's playing the Browns, whoever's playing the Raiders, maybe the Jags, that kind of thing. You look at who's got what sort of matchups to start the season off. And I think, honestly, that is one of the most valuable things that comes out of this. Otherwise, it's a complete waste of our breath.
Well, fantasy football is so terrible. Let me say this.
Says the guy who got back into playing last season.
Yeah,
right?
but like I didn't listen to one word that Des just said about fantasy football. I was like thinking about my lunch or whatever. Let me say this though. People say, the NFL can't stay out of the headlines. They just want to be in the attention all the time. The NHL season lasts like 11 months. It's not like they're like just sitting in the corner quietly. Their season never ends. So it's not. There's no way that the NFL could do anything.
It's like Davis Cup tennis, right? It's all year round.
I mean, it's just we already knew who the teams were going to play. If they were announcing like who they were going to play this season, I mean that would really be news. But we've already known that, so it's just a question of what.
Monday night games.
We don't know the Monday night games, right? Well, but
Thursday night games.
Thursday night games.
But that's the other thing. Things change. So even the Monday night schedule, like a matchup that looks great now could be terrible, you know. And you look at who's playing on Thanksgiving and maybe that looks juicy now.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
There's 3 games now on Thanksgiving.
I know.
Exactly.
Come on.
Some speculation that the Redskins might
Be on what against Dallas? That would be something.
Yeah,
I think legitimately, if I was a fan of a team, the thing you can look for is, are they playing somewhere where there's a weather factor early in the season? Like if your team has a game against the Bills and they're going to Buffalo. Well, if they're going to Buffalo in September, that's a lot more helpful than going to Buffalo in December. So maybe you can draw something from that.
pre-schedule breakdown. I like that.
Well,
I think it's awesome. It's like so funny and hilarious that to me it's gone past the annoying part now. It's just
Wait,
awesome.
we didn't talk about Tebow.
See, I
didn't
froze
talk
you
about
out. I
Tebow.
froze you out,
Oh,
Des.
darn it.
On that note, we'll give you the last word. I wouldn't want to mention Team Tebow in this program because I think no one's gotten
that's
more
the last
mileage by
word.
doing less
Right.
in the pros than any other player in the history of sports. But in any case, a lot to watch tonight. The Caps, the Wizards, the Nationals, NFL schedule coming out. So enjoy tonight's huge offering of sports for Des Bueller, Chelsea Janes, Dan Steinberg. I'm Gene Wong. Remember to follow us on Twitter @PostSportsLive. We'll see you next time.